In this video, we'll discuss the different theories of forgetting. So now we're finally getting to why we forget things, and there's a lot of different theories out there, and we're just going to discuss a couple of them briefly. So one is cue-dependent forgetting, and if you think about it, we've talked a lot about cues and how cues help you remember a memory, right? So we consolidate a memory, we encode that memory, we get it from short-term memory into long-term memory, and the more cues we have, the better we're going to be able to remember it. The more semantic categories that memory is connected to, the easier it is to recall that memory. So remember that elaborative rehearsal that we talked about, and how just identifying a word with a P or a U, thinking about the meaning of it as pleasant or unpleasant, how that helps you, in theory, recall more words. So cue-dependent forgetting is the inability to remember something due to insufficient recall cues. So this might be why you spend a lot of time studying, you go over something, you read it over and over and over again, and then you get to the exam and you don't remember because you haven't provided sufficient cues for your brain to help recall that information. And again, that's why it's so important for you to come up with your own examples. Or even just try to relate the examples that I provide you. So that gives you, if you're creating a personal association, you're going to have more cues to remember information later on. And then there's interference. And so this is where similar items interfere with each other. So that prevents recall of the information. Now we're going to distinguish between two types of interference, retroactive and proactive. So retroactive interference is where recently learned material, so something you're learning now, interferes with your ability to remember previously stored information. So it's retroactive. You can't remember the retroactive information. Proactive interference is where previously stored material interferes with remembering recently learned material. So again, you have new information and you have old information, and retroactive interference is where the new information keeps you from remembering that old information. Proactive is where the old information keeps you from remembering new information. Now this example is kind of backwards for me because it was the opposite, but let's say you learned French. You learned French in, let's say, middle school. And then you start taking Spanish, and you were pretty good at French. And then you start taking Spanish. Now, that Spanish is keeping you from remembering the French. So now you can speak Spanish, you can write Spanish, what have you, but you can't remember the French. So what you learned second keeps you from retroactively remembering what you knew before. This is kind of a classic example of proactive interference. So let's say you had an old phone number and a new phone number. So you learn the old phone number first, and you get a new phone number. So this is a good example for me. I always think of back when we first got cell phones, my husband and I. So he had a cell phone before me, probably before many of you were even born. And he had it for work. I didn't have a phone. We weren't widespreadly used. Imagine that, not everyone having a cell phone. And then we both got phones a few years later, and his number changed because we changed providers. And so I was working in the lab at the time, and the cell phones didn't work in there. So I go to pick up the phone, and it took me a year to remember that new phone number because the old phone number was stuck in my brain and it interfered with my ability to learn the new phone number.